Okay, so welcome to this event, Coming Out, Coming Home, being held in conjunction with LGBT Olim and the Telfed Gay Centre. So welcome to the event. We have two panels this evening. The first panel contains representatives from a number of Aliyah groups, and later on, in just under 2 hours' time, so that's 8 p.m. local time here in Israel, we'll be moving on to the second panel, which will be a number of representatives from Israeli LGBT organisations introducing themselves, telling us what they do, what their organisation does, and why they exist. Okay, so it's going to be an interesting evening. Apologies if the video is a little bit choppy. It's kind of, I wouldn't say tried and untested or untried and untested technology, but we're transmitting via Facebook Live, and there might be a little bit of latency across the Atlantic or wherever you are, so apologies if it's a little bit choppy. Please bear with us. And we're hoping to make this video available afterwards on LGBT Olim's Facebook page as well. Okay. So first of all, I'd like to introduce the first panel. Okay, we're still waiting for one of them to arrive. He'll be here very shortly. But starting at that end of the table, we have Yael from Mishrat HaKlita, that's the Absorption Ministry. We have Neil from the Sochnut, the Jewish Agency. We have Rita from the legal department of the Aguda, which is Israel's national LGBT task force. And we have Neil from Nefesh B'Nefesh. Mark from Nefesh B'Nefesh, I apologise for that. And joining us shortly will be Doron from Telfed, which is the South African Zionist Federation. Okay, so what I'd like to do, I should introduce myself as well, I guess. Didn't do that, did I? My name's Roy. I'm the guy who started LGBT Olim back in 2013. I made Aliyah myself in 2012, and I started LGBT Olim because I felt that there was a bit of a gap in the market, if you like. There were a large number of LGBT organisations in Israel. There were a number of organisations that look after Olim, but there didn't seem to be anything that covered the overlap between those two communities. And so LGBT Olim kind of exists there to fit that gap, if you like. And we organise social groups. We've got English speakers groups, which for Olim, for Israelis, for visitors, anyone who's basically LGBT and speaks English. We have a social event, social groups in Jerusalem, Tel Aviv, Haifa, and Beersheba. And we also have Ivrit classes called Kolpam that take place on a weekly basis. We actually cancelled it tonight for this event. But normally it's basically an LGBT-friendly place for people to practice their Ivrit in an LGBT-friendly environment. Anyway, I will pass the microphone over to the panelists, and so if you'd like to please tell us your name again, where you're from, what your role is, what the organisation does, and that's it. And then we'll start off, then we'll move on to the Q&A section.
I get to go first? Great. My name is Mark Rosenberg. I've been living in Israel for 15 years. I moved here 15 years ago when I was 25. I grew up outside of Philadelphia. And I am proud to be the director of North American Aliyah for Nefesh B'Nefesh. Nefesh B'Nefesh is a not-for-profit that specializes in helping North Americans, Canadians and American citizens, as well as British citizens, navigate the Aliyah process. We work very closely with the Jewish Agency, and we provide holistic support before people make Aliyah as well as afterwards. And the organization just started about 14 and a half years ago, and we're excited to share resources and learn how we can help specifically this.
Okay, my name is Rita. I'm from Beersheba. I present here Aguda, a legal department. In this organization, I deal with Russian-speaking people mostly, but not only. We have a project to provide some information, connect people, and social things. That's all.
Good evening, my name is Neil Gilman. I made Aliyah 20 years ago from London. I live in Jerusalem, and I oversee Aliyah from English-speaking countries to the Jewish Agency for Israel. The Jewish Agency, since before the state began, has been entrusted by the government of Israel with promoting Aliyah from overseas and dealing with aspects of eligibility for Aliyah, as well as initial absorption programs through our absorption centres. It's a great pleasure to be here this evening, and I'm really looking forward to taking some questions.
Hello, my name is Yael. I'm from Brazil and I'm 30 years in Israel. I work in the Ministry of Immigrant Absorption and in the Department of LGBT, and I would be glad to help in any question that you may have.
Just to confirm, you said the Department of Eligibility?
Yeah,
Okay.
inside.
What do we say, LGBT?
Oh, that's it.
Good stuff. So thanks everyone for introducing yourselves. So like I said, this first panel is going to be a question and answer section. We've got a number of questions here, some of which I've kind of collected over the last 3 years from managing LGBT Olim's Facebook page, and others that have been sent more recently. So these are questions that that are of importance to people, maybe not everyone, but for the LGBT community. So let's start with the first one. Okay, so how safe is it for LGBT people to live in Israel? Okay, Rita, would you like to start with that? So how safe is it for LGBT people in Israel?
Okay. It's not an ideal place anyway, but I cannot feel some biggest problem. Maybe sometimes, maybe we can face here hate speech and homophobic person, but we have tools to deal with that, and we know support for people to solve this problem, and we have a lot of organization and our partners, real partners, police and officials, and maybe we can solve every problems. Maybe we need to fight, but we have received at the time our rights. We have rights here, and we can win.
What would you say to people that are living in homophobic, or countries that are more homophobic? I mean, how would you compare levels of homophobia on the streets in Israel to, I don't know, say, the countries that you deal with?
I cannot compare with countries like Canada or America. I cannot compare with Russia and Ukraine. And I can say that here in Israel, it's more. I feel more safely here. That's all. It's hard to compare Russia and Israel. It's two different worlds. I feel that. I 10 years here, and I can see it.
I mean, from a personal perspective, I've felt a lot safer living in Israel. And then, I live in Tel Aviv, which is obviously a very gay city. But I don't think I've ever experienced any homophobic, any home abuse. Whereas in other countries, that has happened. I used to live in Australia, and people used to occasionally take delight by driving through the gay parts of town and shout "fag" out the window. And that just doesn't seem to happen here, from my experience. That kind of thing just doesn't.
Not only in Tel Aviv. I'm from Beersheba. It's like peripheria. I cannot say it's actually peripheria, but sometimes by some reason we can say it's peripheria, and I feel safely there.
I just wanted to add, it's not speaking from my personal experience, but a lot of the Olim that I meet with after they make Aliyah have commented that because Israel is so multicultural. There's so many ethnic groups that have come, so many immigrants that have come together. There's surprising openness to people. It's a paradox in say that sometimes you come against whatever your political beliefs or your ethnicity, they'll immediately maybe make a stereotype about you. But so people are from such different backgrounds. There's more acceptance. There's a very famous Israeli TV show that an immigrant boat comes in and the locals make fun of them, and then the next boat comes in and the new immigrants make fun of them. So there is realities of closed-mindedness and homophobia, but again, from anecdotes that friends shared with me as I told them I was coming here, they said that once you push past that, Israel is such an honest place that there is a lot of openness, and they specifically said to me, these two people, that it was a very different juxtaposition from the communities they came from, where they were a severe minority. As Jews, they were a severe minority, and then especially as LGBT.
Okay, so moving on to the next question.
Roy?
Oh, sorry.
We
have a few.
Question from the gallery?
Yes.
Sorry. Would you mind?
What areas have substantial LGBT connections?
So again, what?
Substantial concentration of LGBTs. Which areas in Israel have?
Okay, so I guess the biggest one, I guess, would be Tel Aviv. Okay, so Tel Aviv has a very large, very thriving LGBT community. There is also LGBT communities in Jerusalem, and Beersheba, Haifa. There's probably, the big cities. Generally, LGBTQ will aim for the big cities. And so, there are organisations in each of those. Tel Aviv obviously has the gay centre that we're sitting in right now. Jerusalem has the Jerusalem Open House. Haifa is in the process of opening an LGBT centre that's also funded by the city, just as Tel Aviv is. So these are the cities that LGBT generally kind of head towards. Okay, and in terms of LGBT pride marches, the number seems to grow every year. Obviously, there's the huge gay pride march in June in Tel Aviv every year. Last year, I think it was like 200,000 people were on the streets, with something like 30 or 40,000 visitors from overseas. And then there are smaller marches elsewhere around the city. So in August or July, there's a pride march in Jerusalem. That's normally the end of the season. Tel Aviv opens it, Jerusalem ends it, and in between there are generally pride marches in Haifa, in
Ashdod,
Beersheba, Ashdod, Hadera, occasionally in Rishon LeZion. But all of the major cities have pride marches every year, of various different sizes, but again, depending on the strength of the community. Any other questions?
Okay.
Yeah? Okay. So let's move on to the next question. So one thing I've noticed with, since opening the LGBT Olim Facebook pages, that a lot of people that are making Aliyah are nervous about telling their Aliyah Shaliach that they are LGBT. I try and encourage people to tell them for a couple of reasons. Firstly, your Shaliach is there to help you find your community, okay, to help you decide where to live and to help you find your community. And the LGBT community is potentially, obviously it's not all of you, it's not all of your identity, but it would be nice to live somewhere where there is a good, sizable community. And if you don't tell your Shaliach that, or Shlicha that, then they're not going to be able to help you. The other option, more cynically, I guess, is to try and weed out homophobia within the organisations, within Nefesh B'Nefesh, if it exists. Homophobia, that is. So I always try and encourage people to. But let me direct that to Neil and Mark. So Neil from Jewish Agency.
So from the point of view of the Jewish Agency, the meeting with the Aliyah Shaliach is a required part of the Aliyah process. It's something which people do feel nervous about, people from any background, because they see it as being this major step in the process. Which it is. We're trying to understand who the person is, how we can best help them, and whether or not they're eligible for Aliyah. Now, if the person chooses to come out to the Aliyah Shaliach, there's nothing to be concerned about. Our shlichim are not judgmental. or certainly shouldn't be judgmental. I won't say that doesn't ever occur, but it certainly shouldn't occur. And our shaliach would then be able to point the person towards relevant resources and assist accordingly. But it would certainly not have any effect on the person's eligibility for making aliyah. That having been said, if the person doesn't feel comfortable talking about the issue, it's really none of the shaliach's business to start poking their nose in and to say, well, do you have a boyfriend, a girlfriend, what's your, to whom you're attracted? It's not something which would be a standard part of the interview, and therefore, if it's not felt to be relevant, if it's somebody who knows where they're going to be locating themselds, then I wouldn't expect the shaliach themselves to bring it up. I would know that when I was asked about coming this evening, when I was asked about whether there were other people who I would recommend coming, I immediately suggested the names of 3 shlichim of the Jewish Agency. One of them finished his shlichut 2 years ago, another finished his shlichut 4 years ago, and another finished his shlichut a month ago. One of them just got married to his same-sex partner, and the other 2 were both on shlichut with their same-sex partners. And that just reflects the nature of the fact that shlichim are taken from across a very, very broad section of Israeli society. So relating to the questions which were asked earlier about safeness and about attitudes to LGBT in Israel, well, that's reflected in the demography of the shlichim, just as it is in any other way.
With another question, if it's okay. I feel so happy to see a Brazilian there. I would like to know how a Brazilian gay Jew can find support in Brazil or in Israel. I would like to know how I can make aliyah from Brazil. Okay.
From Brazil, you need to find the Jewish agency and speak with someone there. And besides that, you will arrive and we will speak Portuguese.
There is, sorry, just wanted to
but there is, I don't know, from whose city is
from
São
Brazil.
Paulo?
It's from Brazil, I don't know.
Okay, the big cities, there is a Jewish agency, so he can apply. That's supposed to be a problem.
And there's also...
with regard to applying for aliyah from anywhere around the world, the Jewish Agency maintains an office in Jerusalem which serves the whole world. Most countries have a free phone number which accesses that office. It works according to the time schedules in the various countries and has native speakers of all the languages, certainly of all the major languages. Certainly we have Portuguese speakers on our staff. Those staff members will be delighted to go through the process, explain what documents are needed, assist with the opening of the aliyah file, and then once the file is ready, we have our staff, our shlichim, in our offices in Brazil, I believe, in Rio and Sao Paulo, who will also be able to assist together with our staff in Israel, not the call center, but our more senior staff, and who can help people with their aliyah planning. With regard to specific questions about LGBT in Israel, I would say that the experts, not the Jewish Agency, the experts are Rumi and everybody else who's here specifically representing an LGBT organisation will be taking part in the latest panel as well.
That's it, yeah. I just wanted to add to that, if you Google Jewish Agency call centre, it'll take you to the exact page where all of those free phone numbers are around the world. I checked it the other day for some reason. But yeah, great question, thanks for that.
Yeah.
Okay, so let's move on to the next one. So we talked about coming out to Shadel, we've talked about the fact that aliyah cannot be denied just because someone's LGBT. Actually, can I ask the question, what reasons are there? I know that there are certain reasons that you can turn somebody down. Can we just quickly cover what
okay, so the law of return says, which governs the right to make aliyah. This is a very, very simple sentence. It starts off by saying, Okay, any Jew is entitled to make Aliyah. It defines who is Jewish as being somebody who was born to a Jewish mother or who is a convert to Judaism. There's no reference to the stream of Judaism in which they come through, and it also relates to the family members of a Jewish person are entitled to make Aliyah as part of the family. So the spouse of a Jew, the child of a Jew, the grandchild of a Jew, the spouse of the child, the spouse of the grandchild of a Jew. So 3 generations now. There are certain restrictions to the law of return. The main 2 which we encounter are that the definition of a Jew also includes the line that if somebody is a member of another religion, i.e. they are Jewish by birth or a convert to Judaism and have adopted another religion, then they are no longer eligible to make Aliyah. And somebody who has a criminal background who is liable to endanger the public safety, then they can also be prevented from making Aliyah. Also on the books, but something which I've never actually seen put into action, is somebody who has acted against the state of Israel or can be a danger to security. I suppose there are a few cases like that which crop up now and then, but practically speaking, that really you have to think about the context in which that was put into place immediately after the Second World War, where there had been Jewish people who cooperated with the Nazis and who were therefore shunned and not eligible to make Aliyah, and somebody who is a danger to public health, which again is a definition which was put in the 1950s when there were many more communicable diseases. Generally speaking, that's only considered an issue nowadays where there's a major psychiatric issue involved with a person. So, but certainly nothing on the benefit of gender beliefs or anything like that.
Yes.
A little comment from the live feed. Someone from Los Angeles mentioned that the Jewish agency was not so helpful, but Nefesh B'Nefesh were.
Okay.
So I don't know if there's a little internal competition here.
That is not if you're in the States or Canada or the UK, you would deal initially with Nefesh B'Nefesh?
That's a great opportunity just to clarify. Nefesh B'Nefesh has a mandate to work in North America, and again, I mentioned before with UK citizens. But our website, our information are available to anyone who's reading English. We provide wonderful pre-Aliyah resources and lots of resources for people who are living in Israel. Our #1 hit article is how to get a temporary passport on our website. A lot of people Google that, especially after the 3rd month in Israel. But we are there to give out support and resources. People who are thinking about making Aliyah, okay, and I presume that a lot of people who are watching have that question. There are 2 things that go through your mind: is could I do it, okay, and how do I do it? So if you're asking could you do it, then this is a great forum to answer those questions about community and employment and life and the lifestyle. These big questions: can you build a family here? Can you build a profession here? But there's also the fundamental question about your application, and do you meet what Neil eloquently described as the criteria to become a citizen, Aliyah, fast-track citizenship. So we do a lot of advisement, okay, we do a lot of meetings with people, but every single person who makes Aliyah will meet with a representative of the Jewish agency. And I think that having had hundreds of meetings, and I know Neil has done the official interview for Aliyah, and it comes down to a lot of people will have a positive experience based on maybe the person that they're sitting across from and also the situation that they're in. And I think when we talk about this, especially the phrase coming out, if you want to open up to the person, there's also the need to be open to what you're going to hear. Sometimes when some of the questions that people are asked of, describe your Jewish background or describe your Israel experience, sometimes can put people in certain situations. Or this is my favorite example of what's your profession? And the person says to me they're a nurse practitioner, and Nefesh B'Nefesh, my job is to tell them that unfortunately that's not really going to be good living in Israel right now, because nurse practitioners aren't a licensed profession. So your dream of Aliyah might have just gone down the drain. So you have to really think about it, and people have said, wow, you rejected me, you turned me off. So there's a sensitivity about the Aliyah planning that goes into it, and I think that I'm surprised to hear that someone would have that reaction, especially I know the representatives in the Los Angeles office, and they're fantastic. But you have to build this relationship as you build a plan, and not to be determined by the fact that there is a standard eligibility question that you need to meet, and be comfortable to meet that criteria. I think that addresses that.
Before we go on to the next question, I'd just like to introduce Doron, and actually get you to introduce yourself as well. So Doron is from Telfed, which is, correct me if I'm wrong, the Zionist Federation of South Africa, but also covers Australia now as well. Is that correct? Okay, so you can tell us a little about yourself, your role, the organisation.
Sure. So my name is Doron. Thank you, Roy. I'm the director of Telfed, South African Zionist Federation in Israel. So we're based here in Israel. Our sister organisation, South African Zionist Federation of South Africa, that will be based there. And since 1948, we've been in charge of the absorption of Southern African Olim. I myself am originally from Rhodesia, today Zimbabwe, so it's all the areas of Southern Africa. And over the years, we've assisted countries, the absorption of Olim from all different countries, because we have since 1948 very well established Kita division. So the countries that we assist besides Southern Africa are Australia and Holland. So Holland, yes, we actually have a common language with the Dutch, that being Afrikaans. So I'm here representing those communities, and happy to field any questions from any of those communities. Just personally, I myself was a Jewish agency Shaliach in South Africa from 2002 to 2006, and married with 5 kids. I live in Beit Shemesh, and since our return from Shlichut from South Africa in 2006, I've been working at Telfed, South African Zionist Federation in Israel.
I just wanted to point out, in Australia it's probably about 3:30 a.m. right now. So there's probably not many people watching this live, but again, the video will be made available on LGBT Olim's Facebook page afterwards, so they'll have access to all of this footage as well. So thanks for that, Doron. Okay, so moving on to the next question. We talked about eligibility. I've had a couple of emails from people who are HIV positive and are concerned about being rejected in their Aliyah application. And also interested to know, assuming that they will, obviously HIV, as I'm sure we'll hear from the panel, is not a reason for being rejected, not having the Aliyah rejected. So the follow-up question is about HIV medication. Any of you have answers to that? I do as well, but I just wanted to have a chance. So first of all, about HIV, is it? On
the grounds of eligibility for Aliyah, certainly somebody would not be turned down if they were HIV positive. As I mentioned beforehand, it is very, very rare in this day and age for somebody to be turned down on any medical grounds. But certainly, from the point of view of eligibility, it's not a problem. Without going to the specific medications, maybe I'll leave that to Roy or one of my other colleagues. What I will add is that when somebody makes Aliyah, they are immediately entitled to register in the medical system. If they're a straightforward Olim who don't have prior Israeli citizenship, they actually register for medical insurance at the airport when they arrive. Okay, if they're arranging Aliyah from the Jewish agency overseas, so they arrive at Ben Gurion Airport, they're processed at the airport, get their ID card, their Aliyah eligibility booklet, they get their first payment of financial assistance, and will also be registered for medical insurance before they leave the airport. The insurance includes all pre-existing conditions, so they will be entitled to the same coverage as any other Israeli who has grown up here, gone through the army, paid the taxes all the years. Exactly the same medical insurance would apply. But with regard to specific medications, then maybe somebody here is better qualified than I to give information.
Okay, so I just wanted to add to that from people that I've spoken to about this. The recommendation would be, if you're positive, to when you make Aliyah, to bring a couple of months worth of medication with you, because sometimes it can take a while for things to settle down. There can be teething problems initially. So bring medication that'll keep you keep you going for 2 months. And by that time, all of the bureaucracy will be in place, and as Neil said, it'll be the medication will be covered by your health insurance here in Israel. And again, for medical insurance in different countries, obviously costs different amounts of money. In Israel, I think it's safe to say that medical insurance is relatively cheap. And especially, how long do you get it free for when you make Aliyah? Is it 1 year? Do you get 1 year of free medical?
1 year, provided that you're not working, is free. If you're working, then you pay a standard percentage which gets deducted from your salary. That's awesome.
Yeah, so I think from my, again, I can't talk for everyone else, but from my perspective, I think once I finished my first year and I started working, I think I was paying about 50 shekels a month for the basic. I think I've upped it since then, but is it no more than that? It's 4 years since I
would hope it's a percentage of your salary, so if it's 50 shekels, then you're not getting paid enough.
That could very well be.
So I hope it's all.
Okay, fair enough. Sorry.
I'd just like to say that really what you just said now it's for all Olim. There's no difference here. Any Olim that's coming with a pre-existing medical condition, we always tell the Olim, bring with some medication. So until you find out exactly what the name is of the medicine here, and if it's also there's different amounts that you took in your country of origin and here, because there's different, the makeup of the medicine might be different chemicals. So there's really no difference. Anyone with a pre-existing medical condition, you always say, bring with just a few months of medicine with you, and really there's no difference here to anyone else making Aliyah.
Any questions, Tony?
No comments.
So we had a question about LGBT-friendly synagogues in Israel. There is a list, it's a partial list at the moment, but there is a list of LGBT-friendly synagogues on LGBT Olim's website. So www.lgbtolim.org, and there's a link for synagogues, and there's a list of LGBT-friendly synagogues in Tel Aviv. And of course there are also in Jerusalem and Haifa and elsewhere. We just need to improve that list a little bit, but absolutely. Obviously the majority of those are going to be on the progressive side, but there are also LGBT-friendly Orthodox synagogues as well. Okay? Anyone want to add to that? Okay. Cool. Question of marriage often comes up. So obviously people that are making Aliyah, some will be single, some will be married, some will be in civil unions, depending on the country that they're in. Some might just be in long-term partnerships. So the first question is always, can I get married in Israel? Would anyone like to cover that one?
So in Israel, marriage for Jews is handled by the chief rabbinate. It's the official Israeli rabbinate. And the chief rabbinate in Israel is an Orthodox rabbinate. So that means that because marriage is handled by the chief rabbinate, they will not conduct same-sex marriage in Israel. However, Israel is party to international agreements with countries throughout the world. And therefore we have to recognize documentation, official documentation, and official unions from countries around the world. That means if somebody comes with a civil marriage, it was done according to the law of another country, a country that has recognized with Israel and it's also signed on treaties with Israel. So those marriages, those unions, need to be recognized by Israel according to law. And they are. So, for example, we have this case now, I can say, from South Africa, that we had a same-sex couple that were married in South Africa. Today in South Africa there is same-sex marriages, and they brought with their official marriage certificate with an apostille. An apostille is a wax stamp. It says this document isn't a forgery and can be relied on. It's given by the High Court to the different countries. And they brought with their civil marriage certificate, and they were then recognized by the State of Israel as being married, even though in Israel they couldn't get married and the chief rabbinate would not perform such a marriage. When they came from South Africa, they were recognized as a marriage couple and registered as such at the Ministry of Interior. So therefore, you have same-sex unions outside of the State of Israel. People come here officially married according to the law of the country from which they've come from, the Ministry of Interior will recognize that couple as married.
Just to add on to that, how does it work with civil unions? I know certain countries don't yet have marriage equality, some countries don't even have civil unions either. So if they come with a civil partnership or a civil union, whatever the country calls it, it's not a marriage by international standards. Does that affect things? Would we advise that they go to a country and get married somewhere, or will the civil union, civil partnership be sufficient?
So Israel has, we're talking here about marriage. And so it would mean that they need to come with a civil marriage certificate, and to be, in order to be recognized as a couple. Because Israel also, within the rabbinate, as I said, is in charge of marriage. There isn't this idea of like a common law, couple that would give you, which would give you a status of being married or those privileges. So therefore, if someone wants to have that recognition of being considered married, so it needs to be that the country that they're making aliyah from, first of all, also has that law, and therefore they come with a certificate that says that they're a married couple, and that will then entitle them to have that status here.
I'd just like to add that civil unions, as opposed to marriage, if it is a recognized union, not just a partnership where people make a bond between themselves, that is also recognized by Israel in the interior ministry, just as marriage. Again, if it's done outside of Israel, they will accept those documents when they come in. There's a general rule, and this is good for Aliyah, if you do it according to the law of the country that you come from, it's almost likely they will recognize it. It's true for your driver's license. And it will be easier than doing it in Israel. You can get a driver's license in Israel, but it will be very difficult and very expensive. So if you would like to try and get your same-sex marriage recognized in Israel, it's going to be an upward battle because of this system. But if you bring it from outside of Israel, it will go through a normal bureaucratic process. They have to recognize it.
Fantastic, thanks for that.
I was just wondering if you could speak a little bit about that, how the trans community is perceived here. If like someone has undergone a surgical transition, is that recognized by the rabbinate? Are they considered their cisgendered selves or not?
So I answer just the same rule.
If you can repeat again the question.
So I'm going to repeat the question. The question came as what are attitudes to transgender in Israel and how are they recognized? So the same rule applies that if you complete your transition and get recognized legally abroad, then the Interior Ministry will recognize you according to the gender that you assign yourself. If you want to begin that process in Israel, complete the process, then it gets more complicated. So therefore, and I want to also differentiate, the person who asked the question, it was a great question, is that there's a difference between the rabbinate, okay, which has the government authority over marriages, and the Ministry of Interior. And this is really important because when you're applying for citizenship in a country, the Ministry of Interior is the one who actually will give you your passport and will determine that you're a citizen. Misad the representative here is the government agency that gives you the benefits and gives you the support and makes sure that you'll get the free health care and make sure you'll get the free ulpan and all those resources. And there's a separate organization which is in charge of recognizing whether you're married and divorced, and that's the rabbinate. So there is definitely a sense, touch on the political issue, a disenfranchisement from lots of Israelis from the rabbinate and what the rabbinate's policy is, but that does not necessarily influence the function of people when it comes to their taxation, they're getting recognized for certain civil unions, or how they would like to get hooked into the healthcare system.
But just to follow up on that question, if somebody does transition in another country and they make aliyah, to say they're female to male or transgender, and so their paperwork here says they're male, and they want to marry a Jewish woman, and they go to the rabbinate, what would happen? Are they going to be recognized as male by the rabbinate, or will the rabbinate not be quite so friendly?
I cannot speak for the rabbinate. That would be a great person to have on the panel here. But again, the rule for marriage in Israel is that they'll ask for documentation. The documents you need to make aliyah, you need your birth certificate, you need your passport, because the Jewish agency wants to authenticate you are who you say you are. So they need to see your documents. If you converted, they want to see the certificates of conversion. People's goodwill to say, oh, I want to be an Israeli citizen, it will not allow you to get an Israeli passport. You have to authenticate who you are. So if you have those documents, technically speaking, according to the understanding that I have of it, then the rabbinate would process you accordingly.
The rabbinate would.
Well, again, would they actually? Their fingers were flouting the law. So when it comes to these politics, but I preface it by saying I do not speak on behalf of them. But if it gets recognized through the system, then it allows you to function through the interior ministry.
Okay.
So regarding the rabbinate and somebody, let's say, who was a female and is now male, or the other way around, and would now like to get married to, let's just take, we have now a male and a female who want to get married. One of them used to be of a different sex before. Certainly coming to the rabbinate with that would provide them with a challenge. But we also have to understand there's different levels of procedures in the rabbinate and different levels of the court. And although it's difficult to say here with just a clinical example of what will happen, we can say that if the person has undergone surgery and is now of a different sex and would like to marry a partner now of the opposite sex, that so it might, as you said, it would take longer to go through that process and get it through the rabbinic courts. But there certainly are enough organizations that surround the rabbinate, that work with it. For example, Sohar. Sohar is an organization that's affiliated with the rabbinate, but is independent and would be able to help somebody that's having a difficult time going through the rabbinate to get through the procedures and get married. So there are organizations, even if somebody does get stuck with the rabbinate, there's a lot of civil organizations, which in Hebrew is called Amutah, right? Amutah, non-profit organizations, that work alongside the rabbinate and help people to progress until they achieve what they would like to achieve. So I would say if that's an issue, it shouldn't push off a person from making Aliyah. There are these organizations that would assist. Another one is called ITIM, which also works alongside the rabbinate. And I would say between Sohar and ITIM, if this were a practical case of a person now who was of a different gender and now would like to get married, I would say that we could bet on it that we would be able to get it through the rabbinate, but it would take time and pressure from different factors.
So I think it's probably safe to say if rabbinate recognition isn't that important to you, it's easier to get married in a country where there's civil marriage, and then just bring the paperwork apostilled and then go to the Ministry of Hapanim and have your ID updated to show that you're married and avoid the rabbinate completely. Yeah?
Roy?
Yes.
Just a comment from the people watching. Everyone here is speaking beautifully to the microphone. You're sounding very muffled and you're speaking to them rather than to the camera.
I'm very sorry.
Excellent.
I will endeavour to do that.
So, if I may, I just want to add on that last question. I think my esteemed colleagues are being rather optimistic, given how conservative the rabbinate generally is. I would assume that if somebody turned up at the rabbinate with the circumstance described, they would evince very little would not be particularly helpful to their situation. That would be my assumption. We do encounter this across a wide range of Israelis who wish to get married in Israel, including all of those who make Aliyah under the law of return as a family member of a Jew, but not being Jews themselves, and also anybody who comes who has made Aliyah or who's here who is not considered halachically Jewish by the Orthodox establishment. And in cases like those, there is a simple solution, which is to travel overseas, get the marriage done over there, and then the marriage will be registered in Israel after those people come back. In terms of Aliyah of somebody who's trans, we've dealt with a few cases in the last few years. Each country has specific procedures for how it recognises the process in terms of the certification that they give to those people. In Australia, for example, there's an official change of sex certificate. In the United States, it's a doctor's signed affidavit according to what I remember. And in those cases, we presented to the Interior Ministry, and they approved, and they registered the person according to the sex the person has now.
So we had a case in Cape Town of a lady that had made Aliyah in the past. And now she was coming back to Israel, but now she had undergone transgender surgery. She was now male. And she was married to another man, officially. He was now married to another man. So that was an actual case that we had in Cape Town, where we had to, now this person already had documentation in Israel stating that he was a female in the past. And we therefore had to then go through the whole process of changing that documentation and enable it to come to Israel. And we went through that documentation and slowly changed, as Neil explained, and eventually, they came and everything was fine. And I must say, your point there for you is valid. We were talking on about the rabbinate. That really is the bottom line. You really don't have to. You don't have to go through the rabbinate. It's really very important for you to get recognition from the Orthodox rabbinate, as Neil said. That if that's not really an issue for you, then just get married outside the country and come with official documentation.
Okay, so moving on to the next question. If somebody wants to make Aliyah and their partner, whether they're married or not, or their partner isn't Jewish, does that throw a spanner in the works? Is that a problem? So if you would like to say that.
So I've dealt with a few of these cases over the years, and a few, probably half a dozen. Important to bear in mind the context that up until relatively recently there was no such thing as same-sex marriage, certainly in the Western world. I think in Canada or in certain states in the United States, maybe 10, 12 years ago were the first cases where it was possible to have a same-sex marriage. Now, the law of return specifically says that the spouse of a Jew is entitled to make Aliyah. The language he uses in Ben or Batzog, it doesn't specify that the spouse has to be of the opposite sex. The tendency of the Interior Ministry, which is responsible for approving Aliyah, is towards a certain conservatism in these things. And so the first time we presented such a case to them, they turned it flatly down. And subsequent cases have met with a similar initial response. In 2014, the Minister of the Interior, Gidon Saar, gave an instruction that same-sex marriages should be recognised as having the same eligibility for Aliyah as a heterosexual marriage. But in all such cases, we always present them to the Interior Ministry. We don't approve them outright as we would do for a heterosexual marriage in the same circumstances. And in those cases, what we've encountered is, generally speaking, we get a positive answer. It just takes a little bit longer than we would like. We are working towards getting an official regulation from the Interior Ministry that says yes, we can treat them in exactly the same way as we would treat a heterosexual marriage. Certainly, it's my belief that should be the case. And certainly I believe that if such a case were to go to the Supreme Court would say, yeah, well, of course, somebody who is a same-sex marriage is eligible for Aliyah, the non-Jewish spouse is eligible for Aliyah in exactly the same way as in a heterosexual marriage.
And do they get citizenship, or is it permanent residence or temporary residence? What's the situation there?
Once somebody is considered eligible for Aliyah, then they're a citizen. So somebody who comes under clause 4 Aleph of the law of return, i.e. the spouse, the child, the spouse of the child, the grandchild, the spouse of the grandchild, is a citizen in exactly the same way as somebody who meets the criteria of who is Jewish. So we always tell people to give, and anybody who's making Aliyah, we always advise to start the process well in advance. In such a case, I would say give yourself a little bit more time because the Interior Ministry is likely to hold it up a little bit. But it's certainly going in the right direction, and the answers which we've had have always eventually been positive, and then the person, when they make Aliyah, is doing so on an Aliyah visa and becomes a citizen.
Only one word. Yes, we have a big problem here, but a legal department have positive results. In this summer, 2 girls, married couple, received their statuses like regular heterosexual couples, and we now deal with that. We have advocates, and you can address this your question to our department, and we can support with these cases.
Excellent, thank you very much for that.
I just want to relate a general topic relating also to marriage, also with a non-Jewish spouse. That's something we encounter a lot, and that's just the issue of conversion, which I'd like just to mention, and it applies to everybody. We had a same-sex couple that came to live in our absorption center. The South African Zionist Federation Israel, Telfed, we're the only Olim organization that we run our own absorption centers. We have 3 absorption centers, 1 in Ranana and 2 in Tel Aviv, providing housing for Southern African, Australian and Dutch Olim. So we had a same-sex couple, and when the couple made Aliyah, so it was a Jewish male married to another male who had converted. And I just want to point out, we're talking about people that are thinking of conversion, and this was more the case that we dealt with, was his conversion more than the issue of the same-sex marriage, which actually went smoother. If you are marrying a non-Jewish spouse and your non-Jewish spouse decides to convert, they need to spend some time in their community after conversion. We generally talking about a minimum of 9 months after the conversion in the community back wherever they make an Aliyah from. So the people that they convert and then immediately say, well, now I'm Jewish because I'm recognized where I am as a Jew and I want to make Aliyah immediately, that causes problems in the system. The system wants to see that the person who has converted is actually living a Jewish lifestyle. And this applies to any convert. I'm not necessarily talking about converts from the LGBT community. Any convert after they've converted must spend some time in the community in which they converted before making Aliyah, so people can see that actually the conversion was real and they're living as Jews. And if they come and make Aliyah immediately, so it can work, but again, then you enter all sorts of obstacles. So also just something to keep in mind as you brought up this idea of having a non-Jewish spouse. If they are going to go through a conversion, which as Neil said, you don't have to do. You can make Aliyah with a non-Jewish spouse, but if your spouse is going to convert and wants to be recognized as a Jew, then they must spend time within the community which they converted before making Aliyah, so that the conversion will go smoothly and not entirely all sorts of hurdles here. Was it a real conversion or not?
Don, I'm respectfully going to disagree with you. In a case where somebody is in any case eligible for Aliyah, i.e. the spouse of a Jew or the child of a Jew, if they convert, then the fact that they were eligible prior to the conversion doesn't mean they now have to wait a further 9 months before they can make Aliyah. They can make Aliyah immediately because they were in any case eligible to make Aliyah immediately in that case, and we will process them in that case as a Jew, not as the spouse of a Jew or the child of a Jew. They'll get a full bet Aliyah visa.
Question from the room. Hi, Manta.
Hi. All right. Moving to Israel is everybody's dream, and excuse me, part of that dream is starting a family. Who can help? Where do people go for same-sex couples if they want to have a child via adoption, surrogacy, or for women by themselves? Where can they go and what help can they get?
can offer some answers to that.
Roy, repeat the question.
Yeah, so the question was, if a same-sex couple making Aliyah, I guess, or even living here, whatever, if they want to start a family, what options do they have? Okay, so there are a number of options. I hope I get all of this right, so if anyone knows better, just check it. So, in terms of surrogacy, there is no legal surrogacy within Israel, but it is possible to go through surrogacy overseas. So I know a number of people in Telfed, and I'm sure in other cities as well, who have gone to India, although I think India has closed its doors.
Mexico and USA.
Yeah, okay, so Mexico and the USA now still allow same-sex couples to go through surrogacy there. India shut their doors. I've also heard more recently that Cambodia is open as well to the idea. It's not a cheap process, but definitely there are organisations that will help you do that. Adoption is an option. Try not to rhyme here. But it's difficult in Israel because single people and same-sex couples are kind of pushed to the back of the queue, and straight married couples are moved to the front. So it's not always an option. Okay, there is always the threat of introducing surrogacy, domestic surrogacy in Israel, but it always seems to be not very far in the future, but we haven't quite reached there yet. Another option is the co-parenting option, which I know a number of couples have done. So gay couples and a single or married woman have reached an agreement. They go to a lawyer together and they write an agreement together, and they decide that they are going to bring this child up together, or the children up together in some kind of co-parenting fashion. So that is another option. Okay, have I missed any of the options?
Single women.
Single women? Okay, I'm not going to start saying the answer.
Mm-hmm.
What do I say about
I'm speaking more from personal experiences of friends that it happens that women will choose to carry their own child, and I think that's more about their bodies and their functions than their sexual identity. And it's common, and you can receive all the government benefits, including, I'm thinking Hebrew maternity leave, and all of the financial benefits of a mother and the extra tax credits that happens afterwards. And the same thing happens also with surrogacy as well, but once you bring the child back in the country, then you're eligible for certain benefits because they're registering you as the parent of the child. But there definitely are, especially about the co-parenting, lots of different communities on Facebook where people are sharing this information, and it's best to go right to those people who are on the front lines, because I go back to my point about the generality. The bureaucracy in Israel is a bureaucracy, as any government has, but if it's recognized, then they'll do it, and they will function according to that. So you have to understand what you're eligible for, and then how to navigate the system, and that's the best way to move forward.
I was going to just say something in terms of bureaucracy. With any bureaucracy, it's always good to clear out a good couple of hours from your schedule to whenever you want to go to Mishra Pnim or anything like that, because you will queue. I guess that's probably the same anywhere. I've never had to deal with the DMV in the States, but I've heard it's horrible stories. So I guess it's akin to that. Cool.
Roy, sorry.
Yes.
Technical issues. Would you mind if we took a 2-minute break?
Yeah,
or maybe 10 minutes and finish or something like that.
Okay, we can do it. Okay, how long? What time is it now?
7, and we have another question, but 7 and 10 minutes.
Okay, so can we go on for a few more minutes and then finish the session?
Yeah, I
or?
think
This one is out of storage.
No, but it's not over yet. It's okay.
Okay.
It's not over.
All right, we'll carry on for a bit, yes?
Yes.
Okay, fine. The other questions. We had a question from someone who was transitioning and was interested in staying at a Merkaz Klita, which is an absorption centre, is that correct? So these are places where you can make Aliyah. It's low cost or free accommodation, subsidised accommodation. But often if you come here as a single person, you share a room. And so the question was, if I am in the process of transitioning, how open will Merkaz Klita be to finding me a roommate, or maybe even finding a room to themselves, or being sensitive to the situation?
Okay, so I'm going to word this in very general terms to start off with. We can, generally speaking, accommodate people who have all sorts of special needs, special requirements when they come to an absorption centre or when they come to one of our programs. That can be with relation to something as simple as diet. It can be with relation to the issue which has been raised here, as long as we know about it ahead of time. Okay? If we know about it ahead of time, then we can, we'll speak with the absorption centres, we'll find the appropriate absorption centre. It may not be that every absorption centre is appropriate for every particular need. For example, we had somebody who I dealt with a couple of years ago who was in a wheelchair, needed appropriate access to her room from a wheelchair. And not all of our absorption centres do have that appropriate access. There are laws relating to public to access to public properties for people in wheelchairs, but there is an amount of time which is given in order to convert the buildings, and we are still in the process of doing so. That having been said, we figured out which of our buildings were appropriate for her, and she was very happy with the result. Just so happened to be in I think it was Aguda, where she had family, so it worked out very well for her. When it's any of our programs, some of the programs are more appropriate than others. Our Ulpan Etzion series of programs which offer accommodation in a group setting, some of those programs are 2 people to a room, some of those programs are 1 person to a room. So obviously, somewhere where there is 1 person to a room is far more conducive to those circumstances, and we'll be delighted to help to make those arrangements. Again, this relates to the first question that I was asked, which is, do we come out to our shaliach in cases like this? Yes, we need to know those details so that nobody ends up with a nasty surprise and unpleasantness when the person arrives in Israel and all is not as it appears to be.
Just a shout out from our audience. Someone from New York says, my mum is watching right now from New York City. So it's important.
Thank you for that. Excellent. What time is it? About just after midday, about 1 o'clock in New York.
Yeah.
Fantastic. So we'll just do one more question. What is the situation for LGBT people in the army? So obviously, depending upon the age that you are when you make Aliyah, you either will or won't have to do some time in the army. Well, first of all, what's the cut-off point, age-wise? And secondly, what's the situation for LGBT people in the army? Would you like to?
With regards to the cut-off point, last year the ages were reduced, so if it was people up to the age of 26 who have been drafted, now men who are over the age of 22 are no longer required to serve. Women over the age of 21 when they arrive are also not required to serve in the army. So what we see, I think, is that it's very rare for the Western countries in any case for somebody to arrive in Israel and be forced to serve outside of their wishes. Generally speaking, people do take that into consideration when they're actually planning their Aliyah date. With regard to, I don't have any sort of special knowledge about serving in the army of LGBT, but as far as I know, people from all those backgrounds can serve in the army, can be open about their sexuality, and there's not a problem with that. But I will pass the microphone over to my colleague here.
I want to say that Rita's first comment today is that it relates to also the IDF. That IDF, first of all, the IDF has tremendous pride about their LGBT soldiers. So you have to, I think the first to answer the question is that the situation is very positive from the official level. They will talk about commanders and other officers and regular soldiers who are serving, whether it is in different units. But it doesn't also diminish the fact that it might be hard it might be hard for LGBT Olim to accept the responsibility of coming and serving. I tell any North American that I meet with, I try to discourage them from serving because they don't grow up with the culture of what it means to actually be bossed around by a 9-year-old for 2 years of your life and not to be ready for it. And therefore you have to go with the proper expectations, and it's good advice for your Aliyah. Aliyah can be hard, you need the right expectations. But I also want to say, I think that the experience that any Ola has, and specifically LGBT Olim, who will do the army, it is such a meeting point of Israel, and it's such an opportunity to break down stereotypes, the opportunity to meet other people. I hear this a lot from friends and other people who have served, that they met people from the other spectrums of life, right and left, religious and not religious, and it allows a great meeting place. So while it may be wonderful unofficially, and you'll see if you follow the IDF on Facebook or Twitter, that they will be celebrating Gay Pride Parade, and they'll have the flag on certain events, that it also hear that it's hard, but I think it's also important.
And I guess if people do come across homophobia or transphobia in the army, there are official ways to deal with that, complaint processes?
Correct. The idea is a Jewish army. You can see it's a Jewish army because you get out every other weekend. You shouldn't be away from your family too much. But also, there's a I always get this word wrong. I always think it's a word for sushi. Machitash. Mashakitash. It sounds like a dimsu. Maybe I'm just hungry. But there's a social worker assigned to the units, and especially for Olim. But they're there to make sure that there is a calmness and there's integration, and they're worried about the mental health as much as the commanders are worried about their physical health. So that's probably the appropriate person to turn to if you feel you've encountered discrimination or you feel uncomfortable.
And also, just to ask, there are also people who make Aliyah with the express direction of coming here to do the army, lone soldiers and so on. Are there cut-off points for that as well? If you're over a certain age, will they not accept you, for example? So,
if you're over the age of 26, they probably will not accept you unless you're a doctor or a dentist. They'll have a requirement. I've met people who really wanted to serve. And it's a great opportunity to give them good Aliyah advice, is that no is just the start of negotiations. So if you encounter, it's true for every aspect of Israel. So if you really want to serve and you go back and you push in, then people have pushed themselves in because they really want to have that experience.
If you are after 26, you can apply for volunteer, and you can make 1 year, 2 years, or 3 years of army.
I just want to expand on your point about volunteering. This was again a general point to all of you, but there's a program called Machal, which stands for Mitnadvei Chutzlar. It's volunteers from overseas. You don't have to make Aliyah in order to come and serve in the Israeli army. You don't have to be Olim. You can come from overseas and you can serve for 14 months in the Israeli army, and then you can go back to your country of origin. And it's a special program that's existed since 1948. Where volunteers came to help the Israeli army in the War of Independence. Actually, the only time in our history actually called for volunteers from overseas. So that's a program that people can consider, and it's open, including to people from the LGBT community, to come and volunteer in the Machal program. Obviously, it would be important to do a Hebrew program before that to make sure that your Hebrew is up to level. You don't want to go into the army and not understand what commands they're giving you. Right, but that's a program that's available.
Okay, so I think that's all of the questions we have for now. So, sometime what time it is?
It is 1917.
1917.
Yes, it's
7:15. So, what we're going to do is going to have a short break up until the next hour. So, it's about a 45-minute break at 8 o'clock the local time. So that's 2 p.m. in New York and 11 a.m. in West Coast US and 6 p.m. in the UK, off the top of my head, and probably other times in other places. We'll start again there. We'll have a second panel. The lineup will change. The second panel is going to be representatives from a number of LGBT organisations. They'll tell you about their organisation, what they do, why they exist. So thank you very much for joining us, and everyone here as well for coming along, and thanks for all the questions. And thanks especially to our panel for coming along. Some of these guys have travelled a long way. So we really appreciate that. Thank you very much.
I'll just say,